I've already been to Beijing's Summer Palace on 3 previous occasions. Last time it was pouring with rain, but it has to be one of my favourite places in the northern capital. The Summer Palace, or Yiheyuan, which literally means Gardens of Nurtured Harmony, covers an expanse of 2.9 square kilometres, 3/4 of which is water. Line 4 of the subway system takes you virtually there. From Shiyuan Station, it's a 10-minute walk past loads of street food stalls and fighting your way through the army of rickshaw drivers who are intent on parting you from your well-earned renminbi to drive you the length of the street. But within minutes you'll know you've arrived. What hits the eye is a grand paifan, not doing a very good job of hiding a bus terminus. What visitors often fail to notice, however, is that there is a little museum, otherwise known as a visitors' centre, right by the paifan, which is free to enter and actually remarkably good in telling you practically everything you ever wanted to know about the Summer Palace, but were afraid to ask. It also has what must be one of the most beautifully constructed loos, which is actually clean inside and well worth walking through the museum just to try out its facilities before venturing into the park. In December 1998, UNESCO included the Summer Palace on its World Heritage List, declaring it a masterpiece of Chinese landscape garden design. The natural landscape of hills and open water is combined with artificial features, such as pavilions, halls, palaces, temples and bridges, to form a harmonious ensemble of outstanding aesthetic value, it said. And quite right too. The Summer Palace started life as the Garden of Clear Ripples, or Qingyuan, in 1750. Artisans reproduced the garden architectural styles of various palaces across the Middle Kingdom. The first thing you see when you enter the Summer Palace gardens is a lovely bronze Qilin statue standing guard over the Hall of Benevolence and Longevity. It's a lovely way to start your tour of the massive park, albeit that you normally have to fight your way through hordes of visitors who have the same idea as you in what they want to see. Apart from the Qilin, there are other statues around, such as storks, lions and dragons, all of which would have attracted loads of Kodak camera owners in their day. One thing that many visitors are unaware of, though, are the railings that have been specially constructed to keep their grimy mitts off the said statues. The Chinese obviously hold these in very high esteem, though in my ignorance I had never realized their importance until I saw a notice pointing this fact out to me. For me, though, the main attraction of the Summer Palace is not the railings, but the central Kunming Lake, which covers 2.2 square kilometres. It's entirely man-made, and the excavated soil was used to build the so-called Longevity Hill, with its variety of palaces, gardens, and other classical-style architectural structures. In the past, I've always headed straight off to Longevity Hill along with the millions of other tourists. But this time I turned left through the Wenchang Tower, built in 1750 on the largest of the palace garden's 6-gate forts, and along the banks of the lake, which was actually created to imitate the West Lake in Hangzhou. The palace complex suffered 2 major attacks during the Anglo-French Allied invasion of 1860 and during the Boxer Rebellion in an attack by the 8 Allied powers in 1900. The garden survived and was rebuilt in 1886 and 1902. In 1888, it was given its current name, Yiheyuan. It served as a summer resort for the naughty Empress Dowager Cixi, who diverted 30 million tiles of silver, said to be originally designated for the Chinese Navy, into the reconstruction and enlargement of the Summer Palace. But I guess everyone is now pretty pleased she did this, and far from having her wrists slapped for what nowadays would be considered fraud, not to mention grand larceny, she must surely be the toast of the Beijing Tourism Bureau. All around the lake you get fabulous views of the Longevity Hill as boats crisscross their way over the water. A little further on you reach the 17-arch bridge, which is packed with people crossing over to Nanhu Island on the other side, and probably wondering why they bothered. Actually, that isn't really fair. Nanhu Island covers 2.5 acres and is the largest one among the 3 islands in Kunming Lake. Seen from a distance, the island, together with the 17-arch bridge, looks like a tortoise stretching its neck. As the tortoise is a symbol of longevity in Chinese culture, the similarity in shape justly satisfied Emperor Qianlong, who, being the mummy's boy that he was, built this garden to celebrate his mother's 60th birthday. The island has a little temple poetically called the Temple of Timely Rains and Extensive Moisture, though it used to be called the Dragon King Temple. The pavilion-style Hanshu Hall is the shelter where Empress Dowager Cixi inspected the navy drill. In ancient times, the Dragon King was deemed as a mythical divine master of the rain. Every time Cixi came to the summer palace by waterway, she made a stopover for the set purpose of worshipping at the temple. From the island, you get even better views of Longevity Hill. Well, you do, if you have a telephoto lens at any rate. Throughout the park, hawkers sell their wares in the time-honoured way. "Yi kwai, or 1 yuan, shrieked an annoying woman, ruining any possibility of a quiet afternoon spent enjoying the beauties of nature. The false plastic glasses and moustache that she was wearing were too irresistible to miss for all the naughty little boys who would harass their parents into parting with their cash, and then jumping out from behind trees, shouting the Chinese equivalent of "boo" at anyone who was passing by. I managed to resist the urge to get myself some plastic glasses and moustache. To be honest, shyness prevailed. That, plus I wasn't really sure how the Chinese would react to your favourite podcaster jumping out from behind a tree, shouting "boo." Some of the girls, on the other hand, who wanted to be topped out with a large red flower, looked much cuter than their male counterparts. Of course, there were the usual street musicians, including one guy who had been playing at this self-same spot every time I had previously made it out to this park. His female companion tried all the while to sell a CD of his best tracks, but not all tourists are gullible enough to fork out the required 80 kwai, when you could probably get a much better CD rendition in a downtown shop for between 15 and 20 kwai. And in contrast to the more modern attractions of Beijing, such as the Olympic Park, where Mickey Mouse and his fellow rodents want payment for being photographed with you, and maybe I should point out that I'm led to believe this isn't the real Mickey Mouse, who probably suffers from arthritis by now anyway. Here you are more likely to be approached by someone masquerading as an emperor, or emperor's flunky at least, and wanting similar payment. Back in the civilized end of the park, it's time to walk along the long corridor towards the many buildings that are the main draw for the visitors. The long corridor, or Chanlan, is a covered walkway erected in the middle of the 18th century, and famous not only for its length of 728 metres, but also its more than 14,000 rich painted decorations, which depict episodes from Chinese classical literature, folk tales, both historical and legendary figures, and famous Chinese buildings and landscapes, along with flowers, birds, fish and insects. It leads from the gate for greeting the moon in the east, along the northern shore of Kunming Lake. It was constructed so that the emperor's mother could enjoy a walk through the gardens protected from the elements. Like most of the summer palace, the long corridor was severely damaged by fire, which the Anglo-French Allied forces laid in 1860 during the Second Opium War. It was rebuilt in 1886. Along its entire length, it keeps to the traditional zone between the lake shore and the foot of the Longevity Hill, passing in a southward bend around the central building complex on the lake side of Longevity Hill. On its southern side, Longevity Hill is adorned with an ensemble of grand buildings: the Cloud Dispelling Hall, the Temple of Buddhist Virtue, and the Sea of Wisdom Temple, flanked by various other buildings. In the centre of the Temple of Buddhist Virtue stands the Tower of Buddhist Incense, which forms the focal point for the buildings on the southern slope of Longevity Hill. Visitors can climb the tower for a panoramic view of the area. As an imperial worshipping tower, it enshrines a Buddha made in the Ming dynasty, known as the Buddha with 1,000 hands and eyes, although in reality it only has 12 heads and 24 arms. Empress Dowager Cixi burned incense and prayed in the tower on the 1st and 15th days of every lunar month. Despite the size of the park and the myriad buildings that you'll want to see, the park authorities have gone out of their way to offer helpful advice as to the best route to take. And you can be sure that where there's a special vista, there will usually be a signboard pointing this out for you, just so you can't possibly miss it. You can tell at a glance that safety is a high priority, which is just as well as there's quite a bit of walking up and down steep stone staircases to some of the buildings perched on the side of the hill. As you would expect, there are fabulous views to be had from the top as you survey the splendour of the lake below. Or casting your eyes a little nearer, you get a wonderful bird's-eye view of the buildings below. But sooner or later, what goes up must come down. So continuing one's stroll along the side of the lake leads one to the marble boat, or chiffon, also known as the boat of purity and ease. Who on earth thought up these pretentious but lovely names, I wonder? This is a lakeside pavilion, 36 metres long, erected in 1755 during the reign of the Qianlong Emperor. In 1860, during the Second Opium War, the pavilion was destroyed by those dratted Anglo-French forces, who have a lot to answer for. But it was restored in 1893 on the orders of the Empress Dowager Cixi, who I reckon enjoyed a bit of retail therapy now and then. In this restoration, a new two-storey superstructure was designed, which incorporated elements of European architecture. Like its predecessor, the new superstructure is made out of wood, but it was painted to imitate marble. On each so-called deck, there's a large mirror to reflect the waters of the lake and give an impression of total immersion in the aquatic environment. Imitation paddle wheels on each side of the pavilion makes it look like a paddle steamer. I even heard one American couple wondering how often it sets sail into the lake. From here on, around the rest of the lake, it gets pretty quiet, as most people like yours truly eventually run out of steam to go any further. I'm sure that's something I will have to rectify one day, as there are a whole load of cute bridges that you can see in the distance to discover. So instead, I cross one final bridge before heading out of the grounds to Beijing Station to begin the long trek home.